What follows is free. But if you want to see the full extent of what we do and get involved, go to patreon.com/word in your ear. Now, on with the show.
Well, welcome to another edition of Word in Your Ear. Now, we all have a fairly clear idea of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s from all the available memoirs, but the 90s and Britpop is still a real revelation, as this extremely colourful and dramatic book by Miki Berenyi of Lush makes clear. It's called Fingers Crossed: How Music Saved Me from Success. And as her Twitter followers will know, her bio begins, "Go on then, I'll have a half," which gives you something, sense of the flavour of it. Miki, fantastic to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. Brilliant. So then firstly, well, where are you? Where are you at the Mo?
I am in Dollis Hill.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Very nice.
Where are you?
Very nice. I'm in West London and he's in North London.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
and
you're
our
North
producer's
London.
in Seattle. So there we are.
Okay.
But the first question really was why that title? Why How Music Saved Me from Success?
I tell you what, right? I'm really rubbish with titles, and we were in Lush. It was always the very last, we'd literally have the designers going, okay, we actually need a title now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I had my publisher nudging, going, might want to think of a title. This might be the time so we can start work on it. Lists of Lush puns and puns on songs are just awful, I'm just hopeless. So it was really, really last minute. And I think there were a lot. Then, of course, I got the title, and then it was like, okay, now we need a subtitle. And I was like, oh, blimey. So then I had to do loads of that, hey, I don't know, the music, the memories, the razzmatazz, and whatever. And I think the success one was just the last sort of, okay, I've completely lost patience with this. So that was my
But why that line though? Why did you go for that line?
Because
music saved me from success.
Because I think so one element is that I think, most people start off in bands and they want to be successful, obviously, but it's not all it's cracked up to be. And it can, be a bit of a nightmare, actually, And I think with Lush, it was the sort of, it was the only thing that ended up being any good, really, was the music. It was the only thing that made it kind of really worthwhile, because relationships were breaking down and kind of, I don't know, a lot of it got really tiresome. The 8th time that you're playing in Detroit at the same venue, it all starts to wear a bit thin, really. But the music was still really good and it was really enjoyable. But the flip side of that is that, to be honest with you, I think that it's sort of weird that I ended up in music. There's an element of, I did decently at school. There's a lot of other things I could have done. I kind of fell into music because I was looking for a tribe and I was a bit kind of neglected, and I found my people and I ended up doing music. I probably could have earned more money and had a more stable career doing something else.
How true of so many musicians. Well, we're going to come on to all those a lot of really tough times actually later on. But first, and this is very unusual for a memoir, is really almost half of the book is about your quite complicated family.
Well, it's book one and book two, isn't it?
Book one and book two, really, yes, that's right. So give us a kind of snapshot of who your parents were, the kind of people they were, and the life that you were brought up in.
Oh, blimey. My mum was, so my dad was Hungarian. He came over to Britain in 1956, had lived through the war and communism and all of that. My mum was a decade younger and was brought up in Japan. She was born in Manchuria in China, but then They were really such opposite people. My dad was quite reckless and adventurous, and and my mum was brought up in a very kind of like middle class, sort of safe Japanese kind of family traditional environment. And basically, they met at the Tokyo Olympics because my dad was out there doing sort of reporting on the sports stuff, and their worlds kind of collided. And, my mum ended up eloping and joining him in London. It's the 60s. It's all kind of, quite bohemian. There's a lot of Hungarian kind of expats there as well. London is a very cosmopolitan place at that time. And it's exciting, and they got swept up in that. Didn't last, obviously.
Yeah, 'cause it's a really exotic life. I mean, your mum finishes up acting in James Bond films, and
Yeah, I mean, she fell into acting just because there weren't many Japanese people in London who could speak English, and she was very pretty and photogenic, so she just got offered that without any experience whatsoever. And I suppose there is something to that 60s thing, that it was a time of opportunity. You could just sort of land in London and just sort of, I don't know, find yourself in the right company and suddenly be, doing sort of quite mad and crazy stuff. So, but, I think, they lasted all of 4 or 5 years together because my dad was...
But it's really unusual stuff, isn't it? I mean, you're brought up by your very racist Hungarian gran a lot of the time, and there's bits where you talk about how Coca-Cola and chocolate for supper is perfectly normal. When did you realise that your life was not like other people's?
Well, I think like all children who grow up in a particular environment, it's sort of normal in the sense that you're used to it, but at the same time you're quite conscious that other people might look at you a bit weird. School is all about fitting in. It's all about wanting to be part of the crowd. So you keep that stuff quite quiet because, every now and again you'll say, oh yeah, like, oh yeah, I eat raw bacon, and someone will go, oh my God, what? And then you think, okay, I'm going to shut up about that then.
I might leave that. Yeah,
so true.
Maybe don't mention that. Yeah. Can you remember there's a bit where your mum goes out with Victor Lowndes, who has the kind of Playboy empire? You go to his 42-bedroom mansion. I think you were 6, whatever. And can you remember things like that? And
I do remember sort of, I can remember certain boyfriends she had sort of swanning in and out. Usually I remember it from a child-focused perspective. So if it's like a big staircase, I think that's what I remember about Stocks, was just a massive staircase that I could run up and down. I won't remember all the interesting stuff like the Playboy bunnies and what celebrities might have been there. And it's like going to the set of Space 1999 when my stepdad was directing that. I don't really remember the stars. I remember the moon dust, and I remember being a bit disappointed that those sliding doors actually have to be operated by 2 stagehands. Like, thinking, they're not automatic, and all the buttons don't work on the consoles. So I think, I think my mum had these sort of quite, she lived a bit of a high time, I think. Photographers and Victor Lowndes and hanging out with Omar Sharif and, all this sort of kind of stuff. I think it was really exciting for her as well. And I think I would get sometimes, invited along, but it was very much an adult world.
Did it leave you less impressed by fame and celebrity than probably most children your age would have been as you grew up?
I mean, it felt really exciting if it was something that was relevant to me. I wasn't, that excited by meeting, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, like, I don't know, Christopher Lee or something. I think I met him when I was about 7, but I didn't know who the hell he was. Whereas when I met Bernard Cribbins, that was like way more exciting.
For Dave and I, that's just pretty much the top of the tree.
Absolutely.
What do you remember about him? That's fantastic.
He was really lovely, and he signed me a Wombles poster and asked me who my favourite Womble was. And was just such a sort of sweet... Like, I was very, very shy as a kid, and he was just so gentle. And because my mum was in the Wombles movie, right, which is just the most ridiculous thing ever. but and Francis Delatour was in it, and Bonnie Langford was in it. I was quite excited about meeting Bonnie Langford.
Yeah.
So as a child, your perspective's all wrong. Like you meet people that you don't realise are actually really important. So I'm not sure that I didn't think that fame was enticing. I did think my mum had a very glamorous life, and some of that was, genuinely quite thrilling. I think it was more thrilling to be able to tell other people about it. Like, like it made me a little bit popular at school. And I could go, oh, I met such and such, and suddenly everyone's my friend for like half a day or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
So you travelled around a lot, didn't you? You were going to Japan and later on to Los Angeles and so forth. You had an unusual childhood in that sense, didn't you?
Yeah, because my mum remarried and they moved to America, and my dad was in London, but we used to go to Hungary every year for holidays. My grandparents lived in Japan. So we were quite far flung. It's not a very big family, actually. I don't have any siblings. So there was a lot of time spent, in these different environments, which at the time I sometimes slightly resented, certainly when I got a bit older, because I just felt like I was missing out on stuff at home. But in retrospect, I think it was quite a good idea, or it was quite a good thing, because my family was so dispersed that it was difficult to be quite centred. And I do think those experiences were good. I mean, I didn't like my mum living in America, didn't really like my stepdad, so that was quite a wrench, and I did struggle with that. But I just think children are quite resilient. You just get used to it. That's your life, so that's what you do.
Right. But music wasn't particularly important to you until your teenage years. Is that fair to say?
I mean, it was important in that, all children love drawing, all children love music, all children love films. Do you know what I mean? There's some basic human things that we all enjoy. I'm not one to sit here and go, oh yes, I wrote my first song when I was 4 and I knew I was destined for blah blah blah. I mean, I'm not sure how true that is anyway. I do think people retrospectively sort of build these stories to justify, or build a narrative for their career path. I always felt I could have been an artist, I could have been a writer, I could have been a filmmaker. I always liked creative stuff, but I didn't have, I love gymnastics. Do you know what I mean? And there's a point where, of course I loved music when I was a kid. I loved musicals, whatever I was exposed to. I went to tap and ballet class, you know what I mean? I loved it. But I think the point where you actually think, this is where I want to go, the point where some people decide they want to go to art college or actually diverge into something and totally immerse themselves in it, which is what I did with music when I was about 14, 15.
Who were the big role models then? Who made you want to get on stage? The music role.
Well, again, right, much as I loved Susie Sue and Debbie Harry and, various sort of bands, Chrissy Hind, whatever, the big famous sort of girls of the time, the people who inspired me to get on stage were the really shit band that were like third on the bill downstairs at the Clarendon or something, where I thought like, well, I can do that, right? if they're getting applause and they're able to get up there and they look like they're having a good time, well, I can do that. And
yeah, you advertised in the Melody Maker, I think, for musicians who are okay but not too good. So you obviously had a very clear idea of what the tone of this group was going to be like. It was going to be slightly amateur, wasn't it? Anti-star, anti-contrivance.
I don't think we knew what the hell we were doing or getting ourselves into. It was just born out of, me and Emma had joined different bands. We were playing bass. I can't really speak for Emma. For me, I just wanted to be part of it. There was a point where every night I was going to gigs, all the people I was meeting were in bands and or wanted to be in bands or were writing fanzines. There was a real thriving kind of underclass, and possibly also because there was massively high unemployment at the time and people needed stuff to do to fill their time. So I think I just wanted to be part of it. And when me and Emma started writing together, it was just rubbish. Okay, just awful. It was like 3 chords and, I can't even bear to sing it, right? Okay, so, just sort of real, like, little punky sort of na 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 kind of songs, right? And just sort of wanting to do that. And then I think because we started to get press, you're living in London. Emma had been working with Jeff Barrett, who was doing press for Creation and stuff. So suddenly we were getting written about, and it was like, whoa, hang on a minute. We're absolutely not ready for that. But it meant we had to kind of really get our shit together because people would come and see us and go, okay, they are appalling. So it was suddenly like we had to sort of match up to what people were saying about us. And it was a bit kind of in at the deep end. But I do remember Emma suddenly coming up with these songs where I was like thinking, oh, bloody hell. Okay, like I need to really up my game because she's actually taking this really seriously now. So, and I think, that's, we did not start off. There was no template. There was no, we're going to form a band. We're going to be playing Wembley. We want to tour with blah, blah, blah. It was like everything just kind of happened and then we'd sort of climb up to where we were meant to be.
Yeah, you're suddenly having to focus, aren't you? And there's a bit, well, in fact, there's a whole chapter actually about the look of the group.
Yes, I was fascinated by this.
It's really, really amazing. So how did you come up with that idea for the way you ought to look and take charge?
We didn't really. This is how we dressed. We were a bunch of mates. And I think, what I kind of have written this book in a way that it's interesting because I'm not a big reader of rock biogs myself. And I have to say that every now and again I'll sort of dip in and think, oh, I'll have a look. And a lot of music biogs, I think, are either kind of burnishing a legend, which I get, lots of people want to read that. They want to read about all the glamour and the high times, and that's their sort of thing. But I also think there's a lot of kind of assumption of what people know. They're written for music fans. I mean, I read something recently where there must have been like 20 bands mentioned on every page, right? Every tiny niche band that was around at the time. And that's great for people who are already immersed in that world. But I have, most of my friends aren't necessarily into music. So I wanted to write a book for people who might not actually know how some of that stuff works and what it feels like when it happens to you, because I didn't know how it worked when I got into it. So that idea of an image, again, we just sort of waltzed in and thought, well, this is how I dress, this is how I look. It's not till you see it in the paper
that you realise it's an image. Yes.
Yeah,
and then you have to kind of live up to it.
Yeah, you have to maintain it.
It's
that's what people expect.
It's all the things you do instinctively that you then have to do professionally, don't you?
And I was going to ask you, because obviously you worked at Smash Hits, that was your thing, and a lot of those bands were, kind of big pop stars of the time. And but I do remember what I used to really like about Smash Hits was they had like a page that was lesser known bands. I remember sort of reading about Pig Bag and
Indie Bits.
Indie Bits, yeah. It was called. It was nearly always Pig Bag. That's right.
That was really great. But I did wonder, did you find that there was a sort of clash between like the pop bands that were clearly had like quite a lot of work on their image, or
I think they all ended up the same, because what you realise is that everybody thinks about their image.
I know.
It doesn't matter who they are. Very often, if they deny it, it's not true. They are thinking about it.
Because actually, you could argue that the Farmers Boys or whatever, to some extent, are just as contrived as Howard Jones or something, because they still have to think about what they're going to go on stage looking like and maintain that kind of visual appeal. Yeah. I mean, it's not quite so prominent, but it's still everyone's in the same boat, really. This is what we are.
I mean, but I'd argue that the Farmer's Boys probably dress the same off stage as on. They might have put a cleaner shirt on or something. Whereas
Probably.
obviously you get people who just will absolutely
Oh
transform
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
for
yeah.
the stage.
Yeah.
And I think what I remember is about kind of first sort of being put in the press and stuff was just thinking, that's not how I thought I looked. Like suddenly I look really kind of rabbit in the headlights and a bit stiff and small and shabby as well. My clothes were like a bit crap. And I didn't really have, because my mum, I'd grown up kind of away from my mum a lot of the time. I'd not had a kind of guiding female hand to show me how
Yeah.
to brush my hair properly and keep a check on that. So we had this makeup artist, Sarita, who I've written about, who just kind of was like, okay, Miki, I think we need to spend a little bit of time. Just I'm going to show you how to do this. I'm going to show you how to put your makeup on and all of that. And but I don't think we ever, there were times also when it went too far the other way. We would do like a photo shoot and they'd be like, oh, we want you to wear this. And and they'd be telling the makeup artist, put it on really heavy. And then I remember one where Emma ended up with this kind of Dolly Parton-esque kind of curled looks with huge eyelashes. And the photographer was going, so if you can like hook your like thumbs into your shorts and stand with your legs out and kind of thrust your, and she actually sort of did it for about half a second and went like, do you know what, fuck this, and went
Like,
back to the makeup.
yeah, there's a moment on MTV want you to put on Barbarella outfits or something, and you just think, Christ, this couldn't have been what you imagined life was going to be like,
And Emma was actually always really good at drawing a line where she'd go, no, do you know what, I'm not fucking doing this, sorry. And because I was a bit more of a people pleaser, I'd be like, oh, okay, whatever, I mean, I had my line as well, do you know what I mean? I wouldn't do anything. But I think Emma was really good at that kind of, like, just stuff she wasn't willing to do.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff about you having quite a tough time with the press. The press weren't very kind about the group. There's a bit where I think Andy Ross, invents the term shoegaze. So that's Lush and Moose and Ride and Chapter House. And the general impression is that Manchester is all fabulously cool and wonderful, and that shoegaze is kind of posh and middle class and dull. And you get quite a hard time from various critics. Was that the case? I mean, it seemed you weren't that kindly, written about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were the butt of a lot of, I don't know, angst. I mean, I could never really figure it out. Look, there were loads of people I knew in the press who were absolutely great and they were very nice to us and friendly and you could talk to them. There were a lot of people I met who, the second I met them were kind of looking down at me and sneering. And I thought, well, whatever I do is just not going to work for you, is it? You've made your mind up what kind of a person I am, what you think of me. And I do think that there were quite a few journalists. There was an editorial attitude at some point with those, particularly with the weeklies, that, look, these bands come and go, right? Our magazine is going to be here. Who gives a shit, right? We build them up, we knock them down. There will always be someone else to replace them. And like I say, not all of them. I knew people who were like really into certain bands and they absolutely loved music. But there was an awful lot of people I felt who didn't actually like music very much, I'll be honest with you. And all they were looking for was an angle or, I mean, I had someone recently, I'm not going to say who, but someone who used to be a writer who said like, oh my God, I got an advanced copy of your book. I didn't know any of that stuff about you. That's amazing. And I was like, yeah, we didn't ask, did you? Because you weren't bloody interested. I could spend every interview going on about, oh, so what are your influences? I could sit there and say, I love garage music. I love this or like, I love that. It would be like, no, we want you to say the Cocteau Twins and My Bloody Valentine. Those are the only two bands we're going to write down because it fits our narrative.
Yeah.
And I just found some of it irritating and rude.
What about you kind of, what about the situation of just being a well-known young woman in a band? Do you find a lot of jealousy around that from the public?
I mean, it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? I mean, I think there were times where, look, I'm not going to lie, it's great fun when you could walk into a backstage area and talk to whoever the bloody hell you want to talk to. But I think there was a point where, look, I mean, I think when it was shoegaze and it was all the kind of early Lush stuff, I didn't really think anyone gave a shit. You know, I'd go to gigs and I'd be down the front and someone might sort of go, oh God, I saw you last week, and you can just have a nice chat. There was a point where I think it tipped into like mainstream. You know, in that shoegaze period, those bands were still underground. There were much, much more famous bands. So no one thought, you know, if you acted like a big fish, you were looked at as a bit ridiculous anyway. When it tipped into the mainstream, then people actually thought, I bet you think you're something really special. I don't. Ask me. But what I would get is people coming up and being a bit like, you know, oh, are you in Lush? And I'd be like, yeah. And they go, yeah, well, I think you're shit. And like,
So
okay,
people
well,
actually say that to you. People said that to you kind of in the
oh,
street.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a bit where somebody comes up to you in the street and asks for your autograph, and then you give them the autograph, and they just tears it up, screws it up, and, you know, throws it on the ground in front of you. You just think that's just appalling.
Yeah. I did think it was appalling.
Would it be worse now in the days of social media? Would that be worse, or would you have more of a chance of protecting yourself? I don't know.
Actually, I was talking to a younger female musician who picked on exactly that part of the book and said, at least you don't get that now. You might get trolled, you might get abuse or whatever, but you can, it's not, there's something about face to face that can, and it's humiliating because other people are watching.
It's awful.
And, you know, you see other people and you suddenly around you and you think, they think it's funny as well. So it's, do you know what I mean? You feel a bit, no one comes up and goes, oh my God, are you all right? Like, God, you're really rude. You shouldn't do that. No one does that, right? They will just stand back and look. So you feel quite, you know, exposed.
Well, it's just hurtful, isn't it? I mean, presumably you don't stop thinking about that kind of thing when it happens.
Do you know, I think I remember talking to one journalist who sort of said, yeah, but you don't mind it when people come up and say, oh, I think you're great and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, because I tell you what, bloke journalist, I said, if I come up to you and say, oh, you've got your haircut, looks really nice, love your clothes, you're going to love that, aren't you? I don't go up to you and go, well, you look like a piece of shit. Like, your acne's flared up, hasn't it? It's like...
Again.
Well, do you know what I mean? I just don't think it's an equal thing.
I wonder if there might be an element of Britishness in it. Reading the book, I thought there's the bit where you're so liberated when the group go on tour in America and you're playing these really big, the big tours, and you said that the audience reaction is totally different. That the American audience is kind of there, I'm here to enjoy myself. Is that right? And there's the British audience is very much kind of, okay, arms crossed, impress me. Did you feel there was a major difference between the two?
I mean, you know, it's not a blanket thing. I think New York was always quite tough.
Yeah.
You know, they're quite a bit more of a judgy crowd. But, you know, you could go to like Austin any day of the week and they just go wild. I think it's just nice to have both. I don't prefer one over the other. You know, the problem with the kind of, I love you guys, oh my God, you guys are so great, is that it's a bit like, oh, there's that... Allow me just for a moment. There's a Woody Allen film where he's in bed with Diane Keaton and she sparks up a joint and he gets really pissed off about it. And she's like, what's the problem? And he's like, well, it's like going on stage to a stoned audience. They're laughing already. Like, what's the bloody point? Do you know what I mean? And there is something to that of, you know, when we did Lollapalooza, sometimes I would go out, well, I went out the front every day and watched some of the bands and I'd instantly get like 5 or 6 people coming up and asking for my autograph and going like, oh my God, you were just on stage, weren't you? And I'd be like, yeah, but you literally don't know anything about me or who I am, or I don't even think you like our music. But that kind of fame thing in America was much more sort of, I mean, they love it. So you do get a kind of different sort of treatment, but sometimes it just feels like, well, you know, you could be anyone, really.
But that Lollapalooza thing really reminds you it was different times, because you're on the bill with, I think it's Ice Cube of Ministry, Chili Peppers, Soundgarden, Jesus and Mary Chain, Pearl Jam. You and Emma, I think, are the only girls on stage. I mean, that would just never happen now, would it?
To be fair, Ministry got a load of dancers on who were kind of voguing in very odd gear. I think the Chili Peppers might have had a stripper or two on stage. So
that's all right.
Fair dues.
So
great, more girls.
Technically, there were women up on stage. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. I just thought, on the one hand, it was terrifying because I just thought it's just going to be so male. And I was sort of used to that a bit in Britain, in a very, very, very male environment. You do get people who just sneer at you as girls and think you're irrelevant, basically. But I didn't really find that, actually. People were really nice, like the weirdest kind of most tattooed, shaven-headed, biker gang looking people were actually delightful and really, really friendly and not sleazy, not trying to shag you, none of that, just friendly. And actually, I'm not going to lie, I had a brilliant time. And like I say in the book, that I don't, that when you look at that kind of Woodstock 99 thing, I think that's where it was headed. Like, by then, you've got people who only want to hear Limp Bizkit, Korn, blah, blah. They want to hear the heavy, heavy stuff and everyone else can bugger off. At that time, people were kind of open to
It's
listening.
interesting.
It is.
Because it was all alternative. Anything. We played with Jane's Addiction and I thought we were just going to get crucified. People were going nuts. Really young teenagers just going absolutely batshit. Yeah, I love you guys, all of this. And you think, wow, this is fucking amazing. Like, I think if you fast forwarded to 5 years, that all went.
Yeah.
As we've all seen recently, we've seen Trainwreck Woodstock 99 or whatever it's called. When you write a book like this, presumably you must be slightly apprehensive about how some of the people closest to the story might respond. Have you been? Have you sent them copies? And what feedback have you had from people?
I mean, I've had some people... I've had a lot of people who are like, oh, just write what you want. I don't care. Do you know what I mean? It's your story. I've had one or two quite surprising ones. I'm not going to say who, but I had a bit of a DM thing of like, well, I thought we were friends. And I'm a bit like... Okay, well, I haven't seen you in 35 years, so I'm not quite sure that's true. Yeah. But, whatever, people who get a bit... And I get that. No one likes to be kind of have their identity sort of summarised through someone else's eyes. But I do say to people, it's an autobiography. Again, if anyone reads it, I mean, I think I've done a reasonable job at balancing this. But this is not a book where you go, oh, my God, what's she said about... another lead singer or whatever. I knew they were a wanker, right? And there's some anecdote about them. This is the short period in their life that I met them. This book is like putting on a Mickey suit and going through my life. It is not an overview of, what people were really like, or a kind of Me Too reveal of, you thought you knew that person, but let me tell you, it's not.
What did Emma think? Can I ask about Emma? Because I mean, you're very honest about the fact that you found it really, really hard recording with her, and she was really interested in recording her songs, but didn't appear to be remotely interested in recording any of yours. And you're really straight about that. I mean, what was her reaction?
Not great.
I wondered.
But again, I did think, it's about our relationship. And I do think I make myself as culpable in, the difficulties that we experienced. I'm not really interested in writing a book that says, oh, yeah, this was our path to fame. Me and Emma were like busy mates. We knew each other from when we were 14. That's what the narrative that everybody else always wrote about. And I just think it's about, I think that Emma... I absolutely admire Emma as a musician. I actually had a really good laugh with her a lot of the time, and I do think that comes across in the book. And again, if she wrote her version of Lush, which I would love, it would be completely different, okay? Because it would be from her perspective.
Yeah.
And you would get to know why maybe she was like that with me, or maybe she doesn't even recognize she was like that with me. But every person's story is going to jar to some extent. Like I say, there'll be people there who I've written about and someone else will know them and they'll go, well, I don't recognize that at all. And I think, no, I'm sure they're lovely to you. It just so happened that I didn't get the best of them, and that might be my fault as well, you know.